The howling wind carried death on its breath, as Isaiah Galloway spurred his horse through the worst blizzard to strike Wyoming territory in 30 years. Snowflakes as sharp as glass shards pelted his face, while the temperature dropped so low that his pocket watch had frozen solid against his chest. The Ridge Trail, once a reliable passage through the western foothills, had disappeared beneath 6 feet of snow and the growing darkness of a December evening in 1872. "Come on, Brutus," Isaiah shouted over the wind's roar, leaning close to the stallion's ear. The horse snorted, steam billowing from its nostrils as it struggled forward. "Just a little further, boy. We'll find shelter." Isaiah had been riding for 3 days, heading back to Clifton after delivering a herd of cattle to Cheyenne. The storm had caught him by surprise, forecasted to arrive tomorrow. It had instead descended like God's own fury this morning, turning the world white and deadly within hours. As Brutus crested a rise, Isaiah spotted a flicker of movement in the valley below. Squinting against the driving snow, he made out a small covered wagon, its canvas top whipping violently in the wind. One wheel was broken, and beside it struggled a figure in a dress, fighting to control a panicked horse. "Hell and damnation," Isaiah muttered, turning Brutus toward the stranded traveler. No one would survive the night in this weather without proper shelter. The woman didn't notice his approach until he was nearly upon her, too focused on her terrified horse. When she finally turned, Isaiah saw a face pinched with cold, lips blue, and dark hair whipping around her shoulders. "Madam," he called out, dismounting with difficulty as his frozen joints protested. "You need shelter. This blizzard's only getting worse, my wagon." She shouted back, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Everything I own is in there." Isaiah assessed the situation quickly. The wagon wasn't going anywhere, not with a shattered wheel and a blizzard raging. Nothing to be done for it now. We need to find shelter or we'll both freeze to death. The woman looked at her wagon with despair before nodding. "There's a mining cabin about 2 miles east," she managed through chattering teeth. "I passed it earlier today." Isaiah noticed her violent shivering and the inadequate coat she wore. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his heavy buffalo hide coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, leaving himself in just his wool shirt and vest. "Sir, you'll freeze," she protested weakly. "I've weathered worse," he lied, already feeling the cold slice through his remaining layers. "What's your name, madam?" "Victoria Greenfield," she replied, clutching the coat tightly around her. "I was headed to Clifton." "Isaiah Galloway," he replied, helping her onto Brutus before mounting behind her. "I know Clifton well, it's my home." With one arm around Victoria to keep her secure, Isaiah took the reins with his other hand and turned Brutus eastward. The horse that had been hitched to Victoria's wagon followed reluctantly, tied to Isaiah's saddle. "Hold on tight, Miss Greenfield," Isaiah instructed, his breath forming ice crystals in his beard. "This is going to be a long 2 miles. Victoria leaned back against his chest, seeking warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak. "I thought I was going to die out here." Isaiah didn't respond, saving his energy for the journey ahead. The Ridge Trail had disappeared completely now, devoured by the relentless blizzard. He navigated by instinct and the occasional glimpse of landmarks whenever the wind momentarily abated. His fingers grew numb on the reins and his face felt like a mask of ice. Victoria had stopped shivering, a bad sign. He knew from experience that when the shivering stopped, the body was giving up its fight against the cold. "Miss Greenfield," he said sharply, giving her a gentle shake. "I need you to talk to me. Tell me why you're heading to Clifton." "My sister," she murmured, her voice slurred. "She's expecting a baby soon, going to help her." "What's your sister's name?" Isaiah pressed, needing to keep her conscious. "Eleanor. Married to the doctor, James White. Isaiah's eyebrows rose in surprise. Doc White's wife is your sister. I know them well. Victoria stirred slightly. You do? Clifton's not a big place, Isaiah explained, scanning the white landscape desperately for any sign of the cabin. Doc patched me up after a run-in with some rustlers last spring. The conversation died as the wind intensified, howling like a pack of wolves. Isaiah's eyes watered and immediately froze on his lashes. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain visibility. When he finally spotted the outline of the cabin, it was almost by accident a slightly darker shape against the white backdrop. Relief flooded through him as he guided Brutus toward it. "We made it," he announced, but Victoria didn't respond. She had fallen silent, her head lolling against his chest. The cabin was little more than a shack, a single room with a stone fireplace, abandoned by miners who had followed rumors of gold elsewhere. Isaiah dismounted painfully, his legs nearly buckling as he helped Victoria down. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The interior was sparse: a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed with a straw mattress, and a fireplace with a small stack of wood beside it. It wasn't much, but it would save their lives. Isaiah laid Victoria on the bed and quickly set about building a fire. His fingers were so numb he could barely grip the matches, but desperation drove him. When the flames finally caught, he turned his attention back to Victoria. "Miss Greenfield," he called, gently patting her cheek. "Victoria, you need to wake up." Her eyes opened slightly. "Cold," she whispered. "I know. We need to warm you up." He hesitated, knowing what needed to be done but aware of the impropriety. "Miss Greenfield, your clothes are damp from the snow. You need to get out of them or you'll never get warm." A hint of alarm crossed her face. "I'll turn my back," Isaiah promised. "There's a blanket on the bed. Wrap yourself in it. I'll tend to the horses." He stepped outside where the blizzard continued its assault. Brutus and Victoria's horse stood with their backs to the wind, looking miserable. There was a lean-to on the side of the cabin, barely standing but enough to provide some shelter. Isaiah led the animals under it, removed their tack, and used a horse blanket from his saddlebag to rub them down. His own shivers had become violent by the time he returned to the cabin. Victoria was in the bed, wrapped in the thin blanket, her wet clothes draped over the backs of the chairs near the fire. "Your turn," she said weakly. "You need to get warm too." Isaiah nodded, his pride less important than survival. He turned his back to her and peeled off his frozen layers, leaving only his long underwear. Even that was damp with sweat and melted snow. "I'm afraid this place doesn't offer much in the way of amenities," he said, trying to inject some humor into their dire situation as he moved to stand near the fire. "It has walls and a fireplace," Victoria replied. "Right now, that makes it a palace." Isaiah managed a chuckle, rubbing his hands together near the flames. The fire was building nicely, beginning to push back the pervasive chill. He added another log, watching the sparks rise up the chimney. "How long have you been riding in this?" Victoria asked. "Since it started this morning," Isaiah replied. "I was on my way back from Cheyenne." "You're a cattleman." "When the opportunity arises," he said. "I do a bit of everything: ranching, hunting, guiding, whatever puts food on the table." Victoria's eyes were more alert now, warming, returning sense to her body and mind. Isaiah noticed for the first time that they were a striking shade of green. "And you?" he asked. "Were you coming from far?" "Denver," she replied. "I was teaching at a ladies' academy there, but Alina's letter sounded desperate. This is her first child, and her husband is too busy with his patients to give her the attention she needs." Isaiah nodded, understanding. "The doc's a good man, but he runs himself ragged caring for everyone in 3 counties. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. The single room was warming gradually. "I think our clothes will be dry by morning," Isaiah observed. Victoria's cheeks colored slightly. "This isn't exactly how I planned my arrival in Clifton." Isaiah smiled. "Trust me, Miss Greenfield, being rescued from a blizzard by a rough cowboy isn't how most ladies plan their journeys." "Victoria, please," she corrected. "And you're not so rough, you gave me your coat." Isaiah shrugged. "Any man would have done the same." "No," she said softly. "Not any man would have. Some would have ridden past, others might have helped, but few would have given up their coat in such weather." Isaiah looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "We should try to get some sleep. The storm might pass by morning, and we'll need our strength to reach Clifton." The question of sleeping arrangements hung silently in the air. The cabin had only one bed, barely wide enough for a single person. "I'll take the floor," Isaiah offered, gathering his saddle blanket from where he dropped it. Victoria bit her lip. "Don't be foolish. We've both nearly frozen to death and the floor is like ice. The bed is small, but we can share it properly." At his hesitation, she added, "I trust you, Mr. Galloway." "Isaiah," he corrected, still uncertain. "Isaiah," she repeated, "we're both adults. Our survival is more important than propriety right now." He couldn't argue with her logic. They arranged themselves awkwardly on the narrow bed, back to back, with the thin blanket covering them both. Despite the strangeness of the situation, exhaustion quickly pulled Isaiah toward sleep. "Thank you," Victoria whispered into the darkness, "for saving my life today." "You're welcome," Isaiah murmured back. "Get some rest, Victoria." As he drifted into sleep, Isaiah realized it had been a very long time since he had shared a bed with anyone, longer still since he'd felt responsible for someone else's welfare. There was something unexpectedly comforting about Victoria's presence, the gentle rhythm of her breathing gradually synchronizing with his own. The blizzard raged on outside, but within the cabin's walls, 2 strangers had found an island of warmth in a sea of cold. Isaiah woke with a start, disoriented by the unfamiliar weight against his chest. Sometime during the night, they had abandoned their back-to-back position. Victoria was now curled against him, her head resting on his shoulder, one hand splayed across his chest. His arm had wrapped protectively around her. The fire had died down to embers, and the cabin was cold again, though nowhere near the deadly chill of the previous night. Outside, the wind had subsided to an occasional moan rather than a constant scream. Isaiah carefully extricated himself from Victoria's embrace, trying not to wake her. He stoked the fire back to life with the remaining wood, then dressed quickly in his now dry clothes. He needed to check on the horses and see what the weather had done. When he opened the cabin door, he was greeted by a world transformed. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape of white under a clear blue sky. The sun reflected blindingly off the snow, which had drifted against the cabin in places higher than his head. The horses were huddled together under the lean-to, which had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow. Isaiah dug a path to them and checked them over. They were cold and hungry, but otherwise unharmed. "We survived, boys," he told them, patting their necks. "Now we just need to figure out how to get through all this snow to Clifton." When he returned to the cabin, Victoria was awake and dressed, her hair neatly braided down her back. She looked different in the daylight, younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and a quiet dignity in her bearing. "Good morning," she greeted him. "How does it look out there?" "The storm's passed," Isaiah replied, stamping snow from his boots. "But we've got drifts higher than a man can stand. It's going to be slow going. Victoria nodded, accepting the news with remarkable composure. What about my wagon and belongings? Isaiah hesitated. We can try to reach it, but honestly, I don't know if we'll find it. The ridge trail is completely gone. Everything I own is in that wagon, Victoria said quietly. I understand, Isaiah replied. We'll do what we can. First, though, we need to find more wood for the fire and something to eat. I have some jerky in my saddlebags, but that won't go far. Victoria straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Galloway. Isaiah, tell me what to do. For the next hour they worked together. Isaiah showed Victoria how to dig through the snow to find fallen branches while he ventured a bit further to check for game. He returned with a pair of snowshoe hares, caught in snares he'd set. I didn't know you were a trapper too, Victoria remarked as he skinned the hares outside the cabin. Like I said, I do a bit of everything, he replied. My father taught me to never rely on just one skill to make a living. He was right about that, at least. Victoria caught the edge in his voice. You and your father didn't get along. Isaiah's hands paused briefly in their work. We had different ideas about what makes a man worthy. He wanted me to take over the family store back in Ohio. I wanted something else. The West, Victoria supplied. Freedom, Isaiah corrected. Space to breathe without someone else's expectations pressing down on me. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. I understand that feeling. It's partly why I became a teacher. My parents wanted me to marry the banker's son in our town, settle down, have children. I wanted to shape my own life first. Isaiah glanced up at her. And now you're heading to your sister to help with her baby. Victoria smiled. By my choice. That makes all the difference. They fell into a comfortable rhythm as they prepared a simple meal of roasted rabbit and melted snow. Isaiah found himself studying Victoria when she wasn't looking, the graceful movement of her hands, the thoughtful expression that crossed her face when she was considering something, the quiet strength she exhibited in the face of their predicament. How far is Clifton from here? She asked as they ate. Under normal conditions, about 4 hours' ride, Isaiah replied. In this snow, it could take all day, maybe longer. And my wagon. Isaiah met her eyes. We can try to find it on our way, but I can't promise anything. The storm changed everything out there. Victoria nodded, accepting his honesty. Then we should start as soon as possible. They packed their few belongings and saddled the horses. Isaiah insisted Victoria ride Brutus, as the stallion was stronger and more sure-footed in the deep snow. What about you? She asked. I'll ride your mare, he replied. She's smaller, but she'll manage. The journey was even more difficult than Isaiah had anticipated. The snow was powder dry and deep, causing the horses to labor with each step. They followed what Isaiah believed was the general direction of the ridge trail, though all familiar landmarks had vanished beneath the white blanket. They rode side by side when the terrain allowed, talking to pass the time. Isaiah learned that Victoria was 27, the younger of 2 daughters, and had been teaching for 5 years. She spoke of her students with genuine affection, explaining how she had saved for 3 years to purchase the wagon and supplies for her journey west. That's why finding the wagon matters so much, she explained. It's not just clothes and books, it's everything I've worked for. In turn, Isaiah told her about his life in Clifton, his small ranch outside town, the horses he bred, the seasonal work he took driving cattle or guiding hunting parties. He described the town and its inhabitants, preparing her for her new home. Clifton's growing, he said. We've got about 500 people now. Your brother-in-law's the only doctor for 50 miles, so he's well respected. Your sister has become quite the social leader, organizing all manner of community events. That sounds like a leaner, Victoria said with a fond smile. She always needed to be at the center of things. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some of the leftover rabbit. The sun was bright overhead, but it provided little warmth. The temperature remained well below freezing. "Look," Victoria said suddenly, pointing to a dark shape in the distance, partially covered by snow. "Could that be my wagon?" Isaiah followed her gaze and nodded. "Might be. Let's take a look." They approached cautiously, the horses struggling through a particularly deep drift. As they drew closer, Isaiah could see that it was indeed Victoria's wagon, though it was in worse shape than when they'd left it. The canvas top had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow, and the entire vehicle listed sharply to one side with its broken wheel. Victoria dismounted before Isaiah could stop her, wading through snow that reached above her knees. She reached the wagon and began frantically digging at the snow covering the back opening. "Be careful," Isaiah warned, dismounting to help her. "The whole thing could shift." Together they cleared enough snow to access the wagon's interior. Victoria climbed inside while Isaiah held the canvas aside. He heard her gasp. "What is it?" he asked, concerned. "It's all still here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Wet but here. My books, my clothes, everything." Isaiah peered inside. The wagon was packed efficiently with trunks, crates of books, and household items, a small but complete life, carefully transported across the country. "We can't take it all," he said gently. "The horses won't manage in this snow." Victoria's face fell, but she nodded resolutely. "I understand. Let me gather what's most important." She worked quickly, selecting a small trunk of personal items, a bag of clothes, and a wrapped bundle she handled with particular care. Isaiah helped her secure these to the horses, redistributing weight to make the load manageable. "What's in the bundle?" he asked as Victoria tied it to her saddle with special attention. "My mother's silver tea service," she replied. "A family heirloom, and letters from my father before he died. Some things can't be replaced." Isaiah understood completely. He had precious few mementos of his own family, just his father's pocket watch and a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. Some possessions carried value beyond their material worth. "We'll come back for the rest when the snow melts," he promised, though they both knew spring was months away, and the likelihood of finding the wagon untouched by then was slim. As they prepared to leave, Victoria stood looking at the wagon for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she squared her shoulders and mounted Brutus. "Ready?" Isaiah asked. "Ready," she confirmed, and they set off toward Clifton once more. The afternoon brought new challenges as clouds gathered and the temperature dropped further. Isaiah's concern grew as he noted the horses' increasing fatigue. They wouldn't reach Clifton before nightfall at this pace. "There's a line shack that belongs to the Collins Ranch about an hour ahead," he told Victoria. "We should aim for that rather than pushing all the way to town tonight." Victoria's disappointment was evident, but she didn't argue. "Whatever you think is best. You know this country." They pressed on, the light fading earlier than normal due to the heavy cloud cover. When they finally spotted the line shack, a sturdy cabin used by cowhands during roundup, both riders and horses were at the limits of their endurance. Unlike the mining cabin, the line shack was well maintained and provisioned. There were proper bunks, a good supply of firewood, and even some basic staples: coffee, beans, and flour. "The Collins outfit keeps all their line shacks stocked," Isaiah explained as he built a fire in the stone fireplace. "For emergencies exactly like this one." Victoria sank onto a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Will they mind us using their supplies?" "Not at all," Isaiah assured her. "It's an unwritten law out here. You leave a place better than you found it, and you replace what you use when you can." I'll make sure Jeb Collins gets paid for our hospitality." As the cabin warmed, they cared for the horses, then prepared a simple meal of beans and biscuits. The familiar tasks created a sense of domesticity that felt strange yet comfortable to Isaiah. He was accustomed to solitude, but Victoria's presence was a pleasant change. "Tell me more about Clifton," Victoria requested as they sat by the fire after dinner. "What are the people like? Will I find students to teach?" Isaiah considered her questions. "Clifton's a mixture, like most frontier towns. Ranchers, merchants, miners passing through. A few families trying to build something lasting. There's no proper school yet, just Mrs. Winters teaching the younger children in the back of the church, 3 days a week. I imagine they'd welcome a trained teacher with open arms." Victoria's face brightened. "Really, I was worried I might have to find other work." "The town's growing fast," Isaiah said. "Folks with children want them educated. You won't get rich, but you'd be valued." "That's all I ask," Victoria replied, "to be useful and to earn my own way." They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily between them. Isaiah found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone about his first disastrous cattle drive, about the beauty he'd discovered in remote places, about his dreams of expanding his modest ranch someday. Victoria, in turn, spoke of her passion for education, her belief that women deserve the same opportunities as men, and her hope to someday open a proper school of her own. "My father thought education was wasted on girls," she said, "but my mother disagreed. She taught us at home until we could attend the local school, and she convinced father to let me continue to the normal school for teacher training." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Isaiah observed. "She was," Victoria agreed, a shadow crossing her face. "She died 3 years ago. Father followed last winter. That's part of why I decided to come west now. There was nothing holding me back anymore." Isaiah recognized the mixture of grief and liberation in her voice. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to find out what you really want." Victoria studied him. "Is that what happened to you? You lost everything?" Isaiah stared into the fire. "In a way. I lost the future that was planned for me. My father disowned me when I left Ohio. Said if I chose the West over the family business, I shouldn't expect any inheritance or welcome if I returned." "That seems harsh," Victoria said softly. Isaiah shrugged. "He was a hard man who believed in doing one's duty above all else. I failed his test, but I found something else instead, a life that suits me better." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, the directness of her question surprising him. Isaiah considered before answering. "Content, most days. Free, which matters more to me than happiness sometimes. But lonely too, if I'm being honest." The admission felt strangely easy to make to this woman he barely knew. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that balance. Freedom and loneliness often go hand in hand." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled. The line shack had 2 bunks on opposite walls, eliminating the awkwardness of their previous sleeping arrangement. Yet Isaiah found himself oddly disappointed as they prepared for bed separately. "We should reach Clifton by midday tomorrow if the weather holds," he said as he banked the fire for the night. "Thank you," Victoria replied, sitting on the edge of her bunk. "Not just for the rescue, but for everything since. Your kindness has made this ordeal bearable." Isaiah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Victoria said firmly, "not anyone. You're a good man, Isaiah Galloway." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded and bid her good night. As he lay in his bunk, listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen, Isaiah realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he was reluctant to reach his destination. "Tomorrow," They would arrive in Clifton. Victoria would reunite with her sister, and their brief, intense connection would end. The thought left him with an unexpected hollowness in his chest, a feeling very much like loss, for something he'd never truly possessed. Morning brought clear skies and slightly warmer temperatures. The snow had settled and compacted overnight, making travel easier than the previous day. They set out after a breakfast of coffee and biscuits, both quieter than before. The landscape was transformed by the snow, familiar features rendered new and strange under the white blanket. Isaiah found himself pointing out landmarks to Victoria, the distinctive formation of rocks that locals called the Preacher's Pulpit, the bend in Gardner Creek, where he'd once caught a trout nearly as long as his arm, the distant smudge of smoke on the horizon that marked the location of Clifton. "It's beautiful," Victoria said, gazing across the pristine vista. "Different from what I imagined, but beautiful nonetheless." "The West has a way of surprising you," Isaiah replied. "It's never quite what you expect, for better or worse." As they rode, Isaiah found himself stealing glances at Victoria. The morning sunlight illuminated her profile, highlighting the determination in her jaw and the intelligence in her eyes. She rode confidently, adapting to Brutus's gait as though she'd been riding him for years instead of days. They crested a rise, and suddenly Clifton was visible in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered houses and small ranches extending outward into the surrounding countryside. "There it is," Isaiah said. "Your new home." Victoria pulled Brutus to a halt, gazing down at the town with an unreadable expression. "It's smaller than Denver," she observed. "Most places are," Isaiah replied with a slight smile. "But it looks sturdy," she continued, "like it's meant to last." "The people who stayed are determined," Isaiah said. "They've weathered floods, droughts, and more than a few harsh winters like this one. They don't give up easily." Victoria nodded, a look of resolve settling on her face. "I think I'll fit in just fine then." They continued down the trail toward town. As they approached, Isaiah pointed out key locations. "That's the church there, doubles as the school some days. The larger building beside it is Peterson's general store. They carry just about everything you could need. The doctor's office is at the end of the main street with their house right behind it. That's where your sister lives." Victoria straightened in the saddle, her eyes fixed on the modest two-story house behind the doctor's office. "It looks comfortable." "Doc White does well," Isaiah said. "He's the only physician between here and Laramie." As they rode down the main street, they attracted curious glances. Clifton was small enough that strangers were noticed immediately, especially those arriving with loaded horses after a massive blizzard. Isaiah Galloway called a burly man sweeping snow from the boardwalk in front of the general store. "Thought you might have frozen solid out there." "Takes more than a little snow to stop me, Carl," Isaiah called back with a grin. "Little snow? Half the county's buried," Carl laughed, then eyed Victoria curiously. "This is Miss Victoria Greenfield," Isaiah introduced her. "Doc White's sister-in-law. We got caught in the blizzard on Ridge Trail yesterday." Carl's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. White's been worried sick. Her time's getting close and she's been fretting about her sister not arriving." Victoria looked alarmed. "Is she in labor?" No, Carl assured her quickly. "But Doc says it could be any day now. You've arrived just in time, Miss Greenfield." They continued down the street, Isaiah noting how Victoria sat straighter, smoothing her hair and adjusting her coat. He realized she was nervous about this reunion, wanting to make a good impression despite her travel-worn appearance. "You look fine," he said quietly. "Your sister will just be relieved you're safe." Victoria gave him a grateful smile. "I know it's foolish, but Alina was always so perfectly put together. Even as girls, she never had a hair out of place or a smudge on her dress. I was the one always climbing trees and coming home with torn hems. Isaiah chuckled. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. They reached the doctor's house, and Isaiah helped Victoria dismount. Her legs were stiff after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly against him. His hand steadied her at the waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him. Before Isaiah could respond, the front door flew open, and a heavily pregnant woman rushed out as quickly as her condition allowed. "Victoria," she cried. "Oh, thank God! We've been so worried." Victoria hurried to embrace her sister, the two women clinging to each other tightly. "I'm fine, Ellie," Victoria assured her. "Thanks to Mr. Galloway here. He found me when my wagon broke down in the blizzard." Eleanor White turned tearful eyes to Isaiah. "Mr. Galloway, I can't thank you enough. When the storm hit and Victoria hadn't arrived." "It was nothing, Mrs. White," Isaiah said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just fortunate timing." A man emerged from the house, tall, thin, with spectacles and a serious expression that brightened when he saw the group on his doorstep. "Miss Greenfield, you made it, Doctor," James White exclaimed, coming forward to take Victoria's hand. "Eleanor has been beside herself with worry." "Thanks to Mr. Galloway," Victoria repeated, glancing back at Isaiah with a warm smile. Dr. White extended his hand to Isaiah. "We're in your debt, sir. Please, won't you come in? You both look like you could use a hot meal and proper rest." Isaiah hesitated. The moment of parting had arrived sooner than he expected, and he found himself strangely reluctant to leave Victoria's company. "I should see to the horses," he said. "And I need to let Sheriff Miller know about the conditions on Ridge Trail. There might be others stranded out there." Victoria's face fell slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "Of course, your responsibilities come first." Dr. White clapped Isaiah on the shoulder. "At least join us for dinner tonight, say 7 o'clock. It's the least we can do to thank you properly." Isaiah found himself agreeing before he'd fully considered it. "That would be fine, thank you." "Excellent." Dr. White turned to his wife. "Eleanor, my dear, let's get Victoria inside before you catch cold. In your condition." Eleanor rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "James fusses terribly," she told Victoria. "You'd think no woman had ever had a baby before." The sisters linked arms and headed toward the house. At the door, Victoria paused and looked back at Isaiah. "Until tonight, then," she said with a smile that warmed him more effectively than any fire. "Until tonight," he echoed, tipping his hat. Isaiah spent the afternoon tending to practical matters, stabling the horses at the livery, reporting to Sheriff Miller about the conditions on the trails, and arranging with Jeb Collins to replenish the supplies they'd used at the line shack. He also sent one of the local boys out to the Peterson Ranch with a message about Victoria's abandoned wagon, offering to pay for its recovery when the snow allowed. As evening approached, he returned to his modest cabin on the outskirts of town to clean up. It felt strange to be preparing for a social dinner. Isaiah typically avoided such gatherings, preferring his own company or the casual atmosphere of the saloon. He shaved carefully, donned his one good shirt, and even polished his boots. Looking in the small mirror above his washstand, he barely recognized himself. "You're being a fool, Galloway," he muttered to his reflection. "She's an educated lady heading for a respectable life as a teacher. You're a saddle tramp with dirt under your fingernails." But despite his self-admonishment, he found himself walking toward the White residence at precisely 7 o'clock, a bottle of decent whiskey in hand as a gift. The house was warm and inviting, with lamps glowing in the windows. Dr. White answered his knock and welcomed him heartily, taking the whiskey with appreciation. "Come in, Come in. The ladies are in the parlor." Isaiah entered, removing his hat and feeling awkwardly large in the refined setting. The white home was modestly elegant, with proper furniture, framed paintings on the walls, and shelves lined with books. Eleanor rose to greet him, her pregnancy even more evident now that she was standing in the well-lit room. "Mr. Galloway, welcome. Victoria has been telling us about your adventure." Victoria turned from where she had been arranging flowers on a side table. Isaiah's breath caught momentarily. She had transformed from the trail-worn traveler into a vision of feminine elegance, wearing a deep blue dress that complemented her eyes, her dark hair arranged in a sophisticated style that framed her face perfectly. "Good evening, Isaiah," she said, using his first name naturally as though they were old friends rather than recent acquaintances. "You look—" He began, then faltered, unsure of the appropriate compliment. "Clean," she suggested with a laugh. "It's amazing what a hot bath and fresh clothes can accomplish." "I was going to say lovely," Isaiah admitted, "but clean is certainly an improvement over how we both looked yesterday." Dinner was a pleasant affair, served in the Whites' comfortable dining room. The conversation flowed easily, with Dr. White sharing stories about Clifton's early days and Eleanor discussing her plans for the baby's nursery. Victoria spoke enthusiastically about her hopes to establish more formal education in the town. "Clifton needs a proper school," she declared. "If the town is growing as quickly as you all say, there must be enough children to warrant it." "There are at least 30 school-age children now," Dr. White confirmed. "Mrs. Winters does her best, but she has no formal training. The town council has discussed building a schoolhouse, but finding a qualified teacher has been the challenge." "Well, they need look no further," Eleanor said proudly. "My sister graduated at the top of her class at the normal school and has been teaching successfully in Denver for years." Victoria blushed slightly. "Ellie, please, Mr. Galloway doesn't want to hear about my qualifications." "On the contrary," Isaiah said, "I find it impressive. My own education was limited to what the village school in Ohio could provide before I left home." "Education isn't just about school books," Victoria replied. "You've learned things I never could in a classroom: how to survive in this country, how to read the weather and the land." Isaiah appreciated her perspective, recognizing that she saw value in skills different from her own. As the evening progressed, Isaiah found himself increasingly drawn to Victoria. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her quick mind, her genuine interest in others, her blend of proper Eastern manners with practical frontier sensibility. After dinner, Dr. White was called away to attend a patient, leaving Isaiah with the two sisters in the parlor. "I should probably head home as well," Isaiah said, rising reluctantly. "It's been a long few days." "Before you go," Eleanor said, "I wonder if you might advise Victoria on something. James and I have discussed it, and we'd like to offer Victoria the rooms above the clinic to live in. They're small but private. However, she'll need furnishings, and we're not sure where her wagon can be recovered." Isaiah nodded. "I've already spoken with Ben Peterson about that. He's sending his boys out to try to locate and retrieve it once the snow settles a bit more. Should be within a week, weather permitting." Victoria looked surprised. "You've already arranged that," seemed the practical thing to do, Isaiah replied, slightly embarrassed by her obvious pleasure. "Would you be willing to show Victoria around town tomorrow?" Eleanor asked. "James is terribly busy with patients and in my condition." "I'd be happy to," Isaiah said, perhaps too quickly. "If Miss Greenfield doesn't mind my company for another day." Victoria's smile was answer enough. "I can think of no better guide." Isaiah left the White residence with a lightness in his step that had nothing to do with the fine meal or the glass of whiskey he'd enjoyed. The prospect of spending more time with Victoria filled him with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. As promised, Isaiah arrived at the White House the following morning to escort Victoria around Clifton. She was dressed more practically today, in a simple skirt and blouse with a warm shawl, her hair braided simply down her back. "Ready for the grand tour?" he asked when she met him on the porch. "Lead on," she replied with a smile. "I want to see everything." They walked along the main street, Isaiah pointing out the various businesses and introducing Victoria to everyone they encountered. News of her arrival and her teaching background had already spread through the small community, and she was greeted warmly by most. "Mrs. Winters is particularly eager to meet you," Isaiah mentioned as they approached a neat cottage near the church. "She's been teaching the children for 3 years now and is ready to pass the responsibility to someone with proper training." Hannah Winters proved to be a motherly woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and a genuine love for her pupils. She welcomed Victoria enthusiastically. "The children need more than I can give them," she admitted as she served them tea. "I know the basics, but anything beyond simple arithmetic and reading has me at a loss, and the older boys, especially, are becoming a handful." "How many students do you have currently?" Victoria inquired. 32 between the ages of 6 and 14, Mrs. Winters replied. "We meet in the church 3 mornings a week. It's far from ideal." Victoria's expression turned thoughtful. "That's more children than I expected. They deserve a proper education and a dedicated space for learning." "The town council has discussed building a schoolhouse," Isaiah mentioned. "The funds have been approved, but construction was delayed by the harvest and now the winter weather." "Where would it be built?" Victoria asked. "There's land set aside at the north end of town," Mrs. Winters explained. "A nice flat acre with a good view of the mountains." Victoria's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "I'd love to see it." After leaving Mrs. Winters, Isaiah took Victoria to the designated site for the future schoolhouse. Despite the snow covering the ground, the location's potential was obvious, accessible to the town, yet with enough space for a building and a proper yard for the children to play. "It's perfect," Victoria declared, turning in a slow circle to take in the surroundings. "I can already envision it a sturdy building with large windows for natural light, proper desks, a library corner, maps on the walls." Isaiah smiled at her excitement. "You really love teaching, don't you?" "It's more than just a profession to me," Victoria admitted. "I believe education can transform lives. When I see a child grasp a new concept, watch that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes, there's no feeling like it in the world." Her passion was contagious, and Isaiah found himself caught up in her vision. "What would you need to get started, even before the schoolhouse is built?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Books, certainly. Slates for the younger children, paper and pencils for the older ones. A proper blackboard, the one in the church, is barely usable. And ideally, some maps and perhaps a globe." "I'm heading to Cheyenne next month for supplies," Isaiah said. "I could look for those items there." Victoria's eyes widened. "Would you? That would be wonderful. Of course, I'd need to discuss funding with the town council first." "Mayor Thompson has called a meeting for next week," Isaiah informed her, "to introduce you formally and discuss the school. I'm sure they'll approve reasonable expenses." They continued their tour of Clifton, visiting the general store, the small lending library operated by the minister's wife, and finally stopping for lunch at the hotel restaurant. Throughout the day, Isaiah was impressed by Victoria's genuine interest in the town and its people. She asked thoughtful questions, remembered everyone's names, and clearly began forming connections that would serve her well in her new home. "You're a natural at this," he observed as they enjoyed coffee after their meal. "Making people comfortable, building relationships. Those are valuable skills out here." Victoria looked pleased at the compliment. "People aren't so different wherever you go. Everyone wants to be heard, to be valued for what they contribute. I've found that listening well is often more important than speaking eloquently." Isaiah nodded, struck again by her insight. That's wisdom many never learn, especially those who come west with grand ideas of changing everything to match what they left behind. "Oh, I have plenty of ideas for changes," Victoria admitted with a laugh. "But I'm wise enough to listen and observe before charging ahead. This community existed before I arrived, and I need to respect what's already been built here." As the afternoon progressed, Isaiah reluctantly realized he couldn't monopolize Victoria's entire day. "I should get you back to your sister. She'll be wondering what happened to you," Victoria sighed. "I suppose you're right, though I've enjoyed our excursion immensely." They walked slowly back toward the white residence, neither seeming eager for the day to end. "Will you be staying in Clifton long?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Or do you have other journeys planned?" "My place is just outside town," Isaiah replied. "I generally winter here, taking odd jobs and tending to my horses. Come spring, I might guide some hunting parties or help with cattle drives, but I always return." Victoria nodded, looking relieved. "That's good to know. I mean, it's helpful to have a friend who knows the area so well." Friend. The word felt simultaneously right and insufficient. Isaiah wasn't sure when his feelings toward Victoria had shifted, but he could no longer pretend his interest was merely neighborly. At the Whites' front gate, they paused. "Thank you for today," Victoria said. "For everything, really. You've made my arrival in Clifton so much easier than it might have been." "It was my pleasure," Isaiah replied. He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I could call on you again. There's more of the surrounding area to see when the weather improves." Victoria's smile brightened her entire face. "I'd like that very much." As Isaiah walked home, he found himself planning future outings, places he wanted to show Victoria, things he thought might interest her. It had been a long time since he'd found himself so eager for another person's company, so invested in their opinions and happiness. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Isaiah had built his life around independence, around the freedom to come and go as he pleased. Caring for someone meant complications, compromises, the possibility of pain. Yet as he watched the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold, Isaiah acknowledged that some things might be worth the risk. The next few weeks brought significant changes to Clifton and to Isaiah's life. Victoria was officially hired as the town's teacher at the council meeting, with construction of the schoolhouse scheduled to begin as soon as the weather permitted. In the meantime, she would continue the classes in the church, expanding from 3 mornings to 5 full days a week. Ben Peterson and his sons successfully recovered Victoria's wagon, though much of its contents had been damaged by snow and exposure. Isaiah helped transport her salvaged belongings to the rooms above the clinic, which she was transforming into a cozy apartment. "It's not much," Victoria apologized as Isaiah carried in the last of her books. "But it's mine, and the price is right free, in exchange for helping Alina with the baby when it arrives." Isaiah looked around the small space, 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen area, simply but tastefully furnished with items loaned by various townspeople, until Victoria could acquire her own. "It suits you," he said honestly. "Practical but welcoming." Victoria beamed at the compliment. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my housekeeping skills." Their relationship had evolved into a comfortable friendship over the weeks, with Isaiah finding reasons to visit almost daily. Sometimes he brought supplies for her classroom, or offered to help with minor repairs to her apartment. Other times, they simply enjoyed conversation over coffee or took walks through town when the weather allowed. Isaiah knew that people were beginning to talk the confirmed bachelor. Suddenly, spending so much time with the new schoolteacher raised eyebrows in a town the size of Clifton. But for once in his life, he found himself unconcerned with others' opinions. The turning point came in early February when Alina went into labor. Victoria sent for Isaiah when her sister's pains began, knowing Dr. White would need his horses to be ready if complications required fetching the midwife from a neighboring town. Isaiah arrived to find the White household in controlled chaos. Dr. White was alternating between husband and physician roles, while Victoria tried to keep everything running smoothly around them. "Thank you for coming," she said when she met Isaiah at the door, her face drawn with worry. "Alina's labor started early this morning, but things aren't progressing as quickly as James would like." "What can I do?" Isaiah asked immediately. "Just having the horses ready is enough," Victoria assured him. "And perhaps, would you mind waiting? I could use a friendly face nearby." Isaiah nodded. "Of course. I'll stay as long as you need me." The hours stretched on, with Victoria periodically disappearing upstairs to help with Alina, then returning to the kitchen where Isaiah waited. As evening approached, her exhaustion became evident. "Sit down before you collapse," Isaiah insisted, pulling out a chair for her. "When did you last eat?" Victoria blinked, clearly trying to remember. "Breakfast, I think." Isaiah rose and moved confidently around the kitchen, finding bread, cheese, and cold ham to make simple sandwiches for them both. "You know your way around a kitchen," Victoria observed as he worked. Isaiah shrugged. "I've lived alone for years. A man either learns to cook or eats poorly." They ate in comfortable silence, Victoria visibly reviving with the nourishment. When a cry sounded from upstairs, she tensed. "That's a good sign," Isaiah reassured her. "Means things are happening." Victoria gave him a grateful look. "I've never been present for a birth before. It's intense." "Life usually is at its most important moments," Isaiah replied. Another hour passed before Dr. White's voice called down the stairs. "Victoria, it's time." She jumped to her feet, then hesitated, looking at Isaiah. "Will you still be here?" "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. Victoria disappeared upstairs, and the house fell into a tense silence broken only by occasional muffled sounds. Isaiah paced the kitchen, then the parlor, finding himself oddly invested in this family drama despite having no blood connection to any of them. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the silence, Isaiah felt a surge of relief so profound it surprised him. He sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how tightly wounded he'd been. It was nearly half an hour later when Victoria appeared in the parlor doorway, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "A boy," she announced. "James Edward White, 8 pounds exactly, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin." Isaiah rose, smiling at her joy. "Mother and child well, perfect," Victoria confirmed. "Alina is exhausted but already planning the baptism." She stepped closer to him. "Thank you for staying. It meant a great deal to have you here." Without thinking, Isaiah reached out and took her hand. "I'm glad I could be." They stood that way for a long moment, hands linked, something unspoken passing between them. Victoria's eyes held a warmth that made Isaiah's heart race. The moment was broken by Dr. White's appearance at the top of the stairs. "Victoria, Alina is asking for you." Victoria squeezed Isaiah's hand before releasing it. "I should go. But tomorrow. Would you come by tomorrow? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Isaiah replied softly. That night, riding home under a canopy of stars, Isaiah finally admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Victoria Greenfield. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a sense of rightness, as though pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together. The question that remained was whether Victoria might feel the same. The next weeks were filled with the rhythms of small-town life. Victoria's classroom in the church was consistently full, with children who had previously avoided school now attending regularly, drawn by her engaging teaching style. Construction began on the proper schoolhouse, as soon as the ground thawed enough to dig the foundation. Isaiah found himself increasingly involved in both projects, helping with the schoolhouse construction, whenever possible, and even occasionally assisting in Victoria's classroom, teaching the children about local wildlife and geography. His knowledge of the region proved valuable, and Victoria's appreciation for his contributions was evident. They fell into a pattern of taking Sunday afternoon walks together after church, exploring the countryside around Clifton as winter gradually released its grip. On one such walk in early March, they climbed to a ridge overlooking the town. The snow was melting, revealing patches of dormant grass and early wildflowers beginning to emerge. "It's coming alive again," Victoria observed, surveying the landscape. "I've never seen a more beautiful awakening than spring in the mountains." Isaiah watched her instead of the scenery, captivated by the wind playing with loose strands of her hair and the color the climb had brought to her cheeks. "Neither have I," he agreed, though he wasn't referring to the landscape. Victoria caught his gaze and blushed slightly, looking away. "The schoolhouse is progressing well. Mayor Thompson thinks it might be ready by May. Just in time for the end of the school year," Isaiah noted with amusement. Victoria laughed. "True, but at least we'll start the new year properly, and the summer will give me time to organize everything." "You're planning to stay through the summer then?" Isaiah asked, trying to sound casual, though the question felt anything but. Victoria looked surprised. "Of course. Clifton is my home now." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "I have reasons to stay beyond just my teaching position." Isaiah's heart quickened at her words and the way she glanced at him as she spoke them. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Victoria," he began, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Before he could continue, a shout from below interrupted them. Looking down, they saw a young boy racing up the trail toward them. "Miss Greenfield, Mr. Galloway," the boy called, out of breath. "Sheriff sent me to find you." "There's trouble in town." Fight at the saloon spilled out onto the street. Doc White's patching people up and asked for Miss Greenfield to help. Victoria immediately started down the trail, Isaiah close behind her. "So much for our peaceful Sunday," she sighed. "Welcome to life in a frontier town," Isaiah replied with a rueful smile. "Never dull for long." The moment for his question had passed, but Isaiah wasn't particularly disappointed. Some things were worth waiting for, and he was increasingly confident that Victoria shared his feelings. There would be other opportunities. The saloon fight turned out to be between cattle buyers from back east and local ranchers, with disagreements over prices escalating into violence. 3 men required stitches, and one had a broken arm that Dr. White needed to set. Victoria assisted her brother-in-law professionally, showing no squeamishness about the blood and injuries. Isaiah helped Sheriff Miller restore order, his calm presence and reputation helping to settle the agitated ranchers. By evening, the town had returned to its normal Sunday quiet, though the gossip about the incident would likely last for weeks. "You handled that well," Isaiah commented to Victoria as he walked her home that evening. Not every Eastern lady could manage a room full of injured, cursing cowboys with such composure. Victoria smiled tiredly. Growing up with a sister who married a doctor, I learned early not to faint at the sight of blood. Besides, those men were more embarrassed than hurt. Their pride suffered worse injuries than their bodies. Isaiah chuckled. True enough, though Peterson's arm will keep him from spring planting, his neighbors will need to help out. That's what I love about this place, Victoria said. For all the roughness and occasional violence, people take care of each other when it matters. They reached the stairs leading to her apartment above the clinic. Victoria paused, turning to face Isaiah in the gathering twilight. "What were you going to ask me?" she said suddenly. On the ridge before we were interrupted. Isaiah hadn't expected the direct question. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "I was going to ask if you'd do me the honor of having dinner with me, not at your sister's house or the hotel restaurant, but... Well, I'm not much of a cook, but I'd like to show you my place. It's nothing fancy, just a small ranch outside town, but..." "I'd love to," Victoria interrupted his rambling with a warm smile. "When?" "Friday evening," Isaiah suggested. "I can come collect you at 6. "Friday at 6 it is," Victoria agreed. She hesitated, then stepped forward and quickly kissed his cheek. "Good night, Isaiah." Before he could respond, she had disappeared up the stairs, leaving him standing in the street with his hand to his cheek and a foolish grin spreading across his face. Isaiah spent the next few days preparing his cabin for Victoria's visit with an intensity that amused him. He'd never particularly cared what anyone thought of his home before, but suddenly, the faded curtains and mismatched dishes seemed inadequate. He repaired the broken porch step, swept out months of accumulated dust, and even rode to the next town to purchase proper wine glasses and a tablecloth. Mrs. Peterson, grateful for Isaiah's help during the saloon incident, provided him with a freshly baked pie for dessert. "About time you started courting proper," she told him with a knowing smile. "That schoolteacher's a good match for you, enough sense to keep you in line, but not so rigid she can't appreciate a man who knows his own mind." Isaiah didn't bother denying her assumption. The entire town had drawn its conclusions about his relationship with Victoria, and for once, the gossip wasn't far from the truth. Friday evening arrived with perfect spring weather, warm enough to be comfortable, but with a cool breeze keeping the insects at bay. Isaiah hitched his wagon rather than saddling horses, wanting Victoria to be comfortable for the ride to his ranch. He arrived at her apartment promptly at 6, feeling strangely nervous in his clean shirt and freshly trimmed beard. When Victoria opened the door, his nervousness transformed into admiration. She wore a simple but elegant dress in a shade of green that matched her eyes, her hair arranged in a style that looked both sophisticated and touchable. "You look beautiful," Isaiah said simply. Victoria's smile was shy but pleased. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself." The drive to Isaiah's ranch took about 20 minutes, following a winding trail that led away from town and into a secluded valley. As they rounded the final bend, Isaiah's property came into view, a small but sturdy log cabin set against a backdrop of pine trees, with a corral containing several horses and a small barn nearby. A creek ran along the edge of the cleared land, catching the evening sunlight. "Isaiah," Victoria breathed, "it's lovely." He felt a surge of pride at her reaction. "It's not much, but it's mine, paid for free and clear last year. You built this yourself?" she asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "Most of it," he confirmed. "Had help with the roof and the barn. Been adding to it bit by bit over the years." He showed her around the property before dinner, introducing her to his horses, the pride of his small ranch, and showing her the vegetable garden he'd recently planted for the summer. "I never pictured you as a gardener," Victoria remarked as they examined the neat rows. Isaiah shrugged. "A man gets tired of beans and jerky after a while. Fresh vegetables are worth the effort." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, one large room serving as kitchen and living space, with a small bedroom partitioned off at the back. Isaiah had set the table carefully, using the new tablecloth and a pair of candles that cast a warm glow over the scene. "Something smells wonderful," Victoria commented as he pulled a pot from the stove. "Venison stew," Isaiah replied. "One thing I can cook properly, my mother's recipe." Over dinner, they talked easily about everything and nothing: Victoria's students, Isaiah's plans for his horse breeding program, the progress on the schoolhouse, and stories from their respective pasts. Isaiah found himself sharing memories he hadn't recalled in years, happy moments from his childhood in Ohio, his first journey west, the mistakes and triumphs that had shaped his life. Victoria, in turn, spoke of her own journey, her determination to become educated despite her father's reservations, her challenges as a young teacher in Denver, her dreams for the future. "I never thought I'd find a place that felt like home again after leaving my parents' house," she admitted as they shared Mrs. Peterson's pie on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains. "But Clifton already feels more like home than Denver ever did." Isaiah gathered his courage. "Is it the place or the people?" Victoria met his eyes steadily. "Both, but particularly one person." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Isaiah set aside his plate and took Victoria's hand in his. "I never expected you," he said quietly. "I'd made my peace with a solitary life. Then a blizzard came and suddenly there you were, changing everything." Victoria's fingers tightened around his. "For me too. I came west for my sister, for a teaching position I wasn't looking for what I found with you." Isaiah reached up to touch her cheek gently. "And what is that exactly?" "Understanding," Victoria replied softly. "Respect. A feeling of belonging I've never experienced before." She took a deep breath. "Love, I think, if that's not too forward to say." Isaiah's heart soared at her words. "Not too forward at all," he assured her. "Because I love you too, Victoria Greenfield, more than I thought possible." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips touching his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with months of built-up emotion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably mention that Mrs. Peterson and half the town already have us married in their gossip." Victoria laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "Eleanor has been planning the wedding since the day you brought me to town." "Would that be so terrible?" Isaiah asked, suddenly serious. "Making their gossip true?" Victoria pulled back slightly to see his face clearly. "Isaiah Galloway, are you proposing to me on our first proper courtship dinner?" "I suppose I am," he admitted with a smile. "Too soon?" Victoria pretended to consider. "Well, we did survive a blizzard together, which I'm told is equivalent to several months of normal courtship in frontier terms." "Very true," Isaiah agreed solemnly. "And you've seen me at my worst, frozen, exhausted, and grumpy. While I was a complete mess with wet hair and blue lips," Victoria added. "Not many courtships include such thorough revelations of character." They both laughed, the joy of the moment bubbling over. Then Victoria's expression grew more serious. "I don't need a grand gesture or a perfect proposal," she said softly. "I just need you honest, steadfast, kind-hearted you. So yes, Isaiah Galloway, I would marry you. Today, tomorrow, or whenever you think proper." Isaiah pulled her close again, his heart fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. "I don't have a ring yet," he murmured against her hair. "I don't need one," Victoria assured him. "But if you want to make it official in the eyes of the town, I wouldn't object to a proper ring and a church wedding. Eleanor would be terribly disappointed otherwise." "We can't have that," Isaiah agreed with a chuckle. "I'll ride to Cheyenne next week for a ring, and perhaps a June wedding, after the schoolhouse is finished." Victoria nodded, her eyes shining in the last light of day. June would be perfect. As darkness settled over the mountains, they sat together on Isaiah's porch, planning their future with the quiet confidence of two people who had found something rare and precious, a love born in adversity, tested by time, and promising a lifetime of shared purpose. The news of their engagement spread through Clifton like wildfire the next day. Isaiah had returned Victoria to her apartment slightly later than proper, but with a clear understanding between them. By the time Sunday services concluded the following morning, every person in town knew that the confirmed bachelor Cowboy and the new schoolteacher were to be married in June. The subsequent weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The schoolhouse construction accelerated as the weather improved, with Isaiah dedicating every spare moment to ensuring it would be completed before the wedding. Victoria continued teaching in the church while planning both the new school and her wedding, her energy seemingly boundless. Eleanor, despite having a newborn to care for, threw herself enthusiastically into wedding preparations. "Just think," she told Victoria as they reviewed fabric samples for her wedding dress. "A year ago you were teaching in Denver with no prospects, and now you're marrying one of the most respected men in the territory and opening a proper school. Mother would be so proud." Victoria smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. "I think she would be, though Father might have preferred the banker's son back home." Eleanor waved dismissively. "Father never understood what you needed. Isaiah does. I've seen how he looks at you like you're the answer to a question he's been asking his whole life." "That's rather poetic for you, Ellie," Victoria teased, though her sister's words resonated with her own feelings. Meanwhile, Isaiah had ridden to Cheyenne and returned with a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small emerald. "To match your eyes," he explained when he slipped it onto Victoria's finger during a quiet moment on the ridge where he had first attempted to ask her to dinner. "It's perfect," Victoria assured him, admiring how the green stone caught the light. "I'll treasure it always." As May turned to June, the schoolhouse was completed right on schedule, a sturdy building with large windows, proper desks crafted by the town carpenter, and a bell tower that could be heard throughout Clifton. The town council held a formal dedication ceremony the weekend before the wedding, with Victoria officially installed as Clifton's first proper schoolteacher. "This building represents our commitment to the future," Mayor Thompson declared in his dedication speech. "Our children will learn here, grow here, and build a stronger community because of Miss Greenfield's soon-to-be Mrs. Galloway's dedication and expertise." The schoolhouse was only the beginning of changes in Clifton that summer. Isaiah had been quietly making alterations to his ranch as well, adding a second bedroom to the cabin and expanding the kitchen area to create a more comfortable home for a family. "You've been planning this for weeks," Victoria accused good-naturedly, when he finally showed her the improvements. "Even before you proposed?" Isaiah grinned sheepishly. "I might have been hopeful. Is it presumptuous to say I knew we were headed this way?" "Not presumptuous," Victoria assured him, leaning up to kiss him softly. "Just perceptive." Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect Wyoming June morning. The church was filled to capacity, with even the saloon closing for the ceremony, a mark of respect that moved Isaiah deeply when he heard about it. Victoria, radiant in a gown of ivory silk that Eleanor had helped design, walked down the aisle on Dr. White's arm, standing in for her late father, toward Isaiah, who waited at the altar with an expression of such joy that many in the congregation were moved to tears. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Thomas, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who found each other in the most unexpected circumstances. When a blizzard devoured the ridge trail, and a cowboy wrapped a woman in his coat and walked through the storm, none of us could have predicted this moment. But God's ways are mysterious and His timing perfect." The vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken with clear voices despite the emotion evident on both their faces. When Isaiah slipped the emerald ring onto Victoria's finger for the final time, his hand trembled slightly. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Isaiah, you may kiss your bride." The reception that followed at the newly completed schoolhouse was a true community celebration. Everyone in Clifton contributed something: food, decorations, music, or simply their presence and good wishes. Isaiah and Victoria moved through the crowd hand in hand, accepting congratulations and sharing their happiness. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Galloway?" Isaiah asked quietly during a rare moment alone as they watched the dancing from a corner of the room. Victoria's smile was radiant. "Wonderful, perfect, exactly right." She squeezed his hand. "And how does it feel to be a married man, Mr. Galloway?" "Like I've finally found what I didn't know I was looking for," Isaiah replied honestly. "Like all those years of wandering were just leading me to you." As the celebration continued around them, Isaiah and Victoria slipped outside to watch the sunset from the schoolhouse steps. The mountains glowed golden in the evening light, a backdrop to the town that had brought them together. "I was thinking," Isaiah said, his arm around Victoria's waist, "that we might start expanding the ranch next year. There's good land adjacent to mine that's unclaimed. With a larger property, we could build a more substantial operation." "Planning for the future already?" Victoria asked, leaning against him contentedly. "Our future," Isaiah confirmed, "which might include more than just the two of us someday if you're agreeable." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "I'm very agreeable to that idea, though perhaps not immediately. I'd like some time just for us first and to get the school properly established." Isaiah nodded, stroking her cheek gently. "We have all the time in the world now." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isaiah and Victoria Galloway shared another kiss, sealing their promises to each other under the vast Wyoming heavens. The journey that had begun in a desperate moment during a blizzard had led them here to love, to family, to a future brighter than either could have imagined. The years that followed proved the strength of their bond. Victoria's school flourished under her guidance, eventually requiring an additional teacher as Clifton continued to grow. Isaiah expanded his ranch as planned, developing one of the territory's most respected horse breeding programs while still occasionally guiding hunting parties when the opportunity arose. Their first child, a son named William, arrived 2 years after their wedding, followed by a daughter, Margaret, 18 months later. The Galloway home, once a bachelor's simple cabin, grew into a comfortable farmhouse filled with books, laughter, and love. On winter evenings, when the snow piled high against the windows and the wind howled across the Wyoming plains, Isaiah and Victoria would often tell their children the story of how they met of a blizzard that devoured the ridge trail, and a cowboy who wrapped a woman in his coat and walked through the storm, finding not just shelter, but a future neither could have predicted. "Sometimes," Isaiah would tell his wide-eyed children, "the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be." And Victoria, her hand in his, would smile and add, "And sometimes The most important journeys aren't about where we're going, but who we're going with. In Clifton, their story became something of a local legend, how love had blossomed in the midst of one of Wyoming's worst blizzards, proving that even in the harshest conditions, the human heart could find its way home.